In October of 1991, the small Nebraskan town of Hastings was stricken with an unexpected murder. No suspects were identified, and a reward of thousands of dollars was offered to anyone who could incriminate the killer of Andy. However, this case has stood out over the years for two reasons. For one, it exposed unforeseen corruption within the law enforcement body that was tasked with solving the case, which had far more devastating repercussions than anyone could have predicted. The other? Well, Andy was a goose who wore sneakers. Andy was a grey goose, and was born on an unknown date in 1987. The significance of Andy's birth, however, has no relevance to the date. He, unlike the majority of other geese, was born lacking webbed feet, and thus struggled to walk. He lived at a farm which belonged to the sister-in-law of a man named Jean Fleming. When Fleming arrived at the farm to visit her in 1988, he saw that the goose was frustrated with its predicament, and decided to help it walk normally. "Because I'm a Shriner, my natural instinct was to help him," Fleming told People magazine several years later, with Shriner referring to members of a fraternity based on, quote, "fun, fellowship, and the Masonic principles of brotherly love, relief, and truth." Fleming brought the goose, unnamed by that point, back to his farm in Hastings, along with its mate Polly, in exchange for some of his own healthy geese. Fleming was a prolific tinkerer who had made a large amount of money through his livestock manufacturing company, after previously being a ship welder. In fact, he wasn't even a stranger to constructing assistive technology for farm animals, his company creating and constructing hundreds of thousands of cattle oilers, a device which rubbed disinfectant and insect spray on livestock to prevent their discomfort and sores during the insect season. Gene's original attempts to aid the goose involved a modified skateboard. He later said about the device, "It'd have a kind of pocket on it where he could anchor one stump while pushing himself along the ground with the other one." This, however, failed. He then fitted the goose with size 0 infant's shoes, using filling to make up for the lack of toes, which instantly allowed the goose's mobility. Fleming's granddaughter, Jessica, later said of her initial meeting with it after coming home from middle school, "I looked out the window and I could see my grandpa holding a leash. So I walked out to see what he was up to, because he was always up to something. Coming home and seeing him with a goose on shoes, it was just another day at the Fleming household." Jessica is also the one who gave Andy his name, after a girl in her middle school she had been fighting with, Andrea. A friend of Gene's, Gary Johansson, authored a short write-up detailing the goose's story, which was published in a local newspaper named the Hastings Tribune. It was not long before Andy garnered local fame, often going with Gene to local events in his orange Triumph TR7. These were most often visits to libraries, schools, county fairs, or accompanying the Shriners in the town parade, but the pair particularly enjoyed involvement in events regarding disability awareness. Andy's fame quickly became national, and also intertwined with much more famous parties. His shoes were initially made of cheap white leather before sneakers began to be used. When the shoe manufacturer Nike learned of the goose, and that he wore out a pair of shoes once every 30 days, they agreed to provide Gene with a lifetime supply of small sneakers for Andy to wear. He also appeared on The Johnny Carson Show, as well as in a photo shoot for People magazine. His fame even attracted tourism to Hastings, Nebraska, the small farming community in which he, Gene, and Jessica lived, who were previously only known for being the birthplace of the drink mix Kool-Aid. Eventually, Andy-themed merchandise was produced, with Gene administrating the goose's official fan club. Jessica, however, who was once keenly involved, was now becoming irritated with Andy's fame. Her troubles had actually been brewing for some time preceding these events, which took place in early 1989. When the local paper ran the initial article detailing Andy's story, Gene took credit for Andy's name, erroneously claiming that he was named for the British cartoon character Andy Capp, rather than Andrea. Jessica later recorded the incident, "I was immediately incensed and betrayed. I knew his angle because Andy Capp sounds like handicap. I get it, I know how his mind works. But how could he have done that at the expense of his granddaughter? How could he have done that? I told him, you and the goose, you're on your own with this." Jessica would later turn down attending the taping of the Johnny Carson show starring Andy, Jessica's sister taking her place. I didn't really appreciate having to go to the mall while Andy was on display, and have to clean up Goose droppings while my friends were at the arcade. I was an awful teenager, let's put it that way. I was not into my parents, and I totally didn't want to hang out with anybody. I really just wanted to be at home and watch Dance Party USA, she later recalled. However, Jessica's compassion would suddenly return in a way that nobody could have predicted. On October 19th, 1991, Gene and his wife Nadine received a phone call from some Hastings residents, who had been metal detecting in a local park. They had discovered the body of a goose without a head or wings near the town's baseball diamond, which the Flemings quickly drove out to. It was soon identified as Andy, due to his shoes being left on. The town's deputy sheriff, meanwhile, rushed out to the 100-foot enclosure where Andy formerly lived, to find 2 sets of fresh footprints, and both Andy and Polly missing. Unlike Andy, Polly was never found. Andy's widespread fame across the country meant the murder gained a significant amount of coverage, with the likes of People magazine, which had previously composed Andy's photo shoot, covering the story, as well as the Associated Press penning an obituary, further propelling the case's exposure. Nadine soon claimed that Gene had received over 200 phone calls and hundreds of letters in condolence due to the publicity. The Hastings Chamber of Commerce promptly stepped in to collect donations for a reward fund if the killer could be identified. Gene began by giving $500, promptly followed by radio broadcaster Paul Harvey with $2,000, after expressing his anger about the situation in a morning broadcast. The remainder of the fund comprised of donations from the general public, bringing the total money culminated to approximately $10,000. By comparison, the most previously raised for a reward fund in the town was $100. However, this did little to reassure Gene. When Jessica initially heard the news of Andy's corpse being discovered, she at first laughed at the absurdity of the concept, before thinking, quote, "Oh my god, what's my grandfather going to do?" Gene buried Andy in his back garden without ceremony, although a large black granite monument was installed later, reading, "Andy the Footless Goose, born without webs and toes, unable to walk and swim properly, was put on the road again by his master, who installed size 0 baby shoes on Andy and then taught him to walk. Andy was an inspiration to the thousands of handicapped children across the USA and foreign countries to try a little harder and don't give up. Make another try. Andy was in Reader's Digest, People magazine, and many others. Andy was also on the Johnny Carson television show." Not long after the burial, Jessica later noted he began showing signs of Alzheimer's. When a Chicago Tribune reporter visited the town several years later, in 1993, virtually no progress had been made in the case. There was a brief speculation that a satanic cult was behind the killing, correlating with an incident in the Colorado city of Denver, but this was debunked upon further comparison. Due to the inactivity, $2,000 of the initial $10,000 fund had been refunded to donors. While some of the residents suggested using the remaining money as a donation towards childhood disease research, the more popular idea was to erect a statue of Andy in the local playground. The Chamber of Commerce planned on colluding with participants in Hastings' annual art fair of the following year to submit concept sketches. Gene, however, deemed this process far too slow and had already begun soliciting photographs from a sculptor in Texas of a clay prototype of a life-size bronze Andy statue. Even with all the prolonged buzz in the community, the case remained open regardless, even as Gene's well-being continued to deteriorate. Gene died in his sleep at a nursing home on December 31st, 1999, due to complications with Alzheimer's. In retrospect, I think it was Andy who had kept him here with us for a lot longer, Jessica stated about his passing. He definitely did not get closure. However, the story does not quite end there. Jessica Fleming, last name now Corgi, began revisiting the case during the mid-2010s, mostly by combing through the extensive documentation her grandfather had left behind, as well as his wife Nadine's extensive notebooks. After phone calls to several unnamed involved parties, she began to suspect that the culprit behind Andy's murder may have been identified. This was eventually confirmed in an October 2016 phone call to former Chamber of Commerce President Don Reynolds, who noted, quote, "About 2 years after the murder, Someone from the sheriff's department called and said, "Well, we found out who did it, but we can't tell you, and we don't want to have any news release about it." We didn't know what to do. Finally, we donated the reward to our community foundation, which used it for kids projects. Of importance, the department also stated that Andy's killer was, quote, somebody that was not responsible, and as such, the case remained listed as unsolved. Corgi has been working on a documentary about Andy's life and death since, although confronting the killer will almost certainly not be included. The officials also expressed their worry that the community of around 24,000 who currently live in Hastings would attempt to exact revenge on the individual should they be publicly identified. Quote, "For the safety of whoever was involved, I don't think it's in their best interest to ever be known. It hits the heart of so many people already, and it just takes someone else to incite justice for the Goose," Corgi commented on the matter. She contacted the police station again in 2018 regarding the case, and was allegedly met with laughter down the opposite end of the phone line. Corgi also stated in an interview that she would return to Hastings later that same year to commence filming, although public confirmation of her visit was never released, nor has any film, and the identity of the killer is seemingly still unknown to her. Quote, "I'm not interested in the name of the person anymore. I wouldn't want retribution against the person or their family. I just want to know why." Many publications since which have offered their retrospective on this story have described it as a true all-American tale. Small town, elderly eccentric billionaire, charming farm animal, and even a murder mystery to top it all off. Jessica herself even joked, "It started off with me telling it as my wow story at bars, just to get people laughing, because it is a crazy story." But Andy clearly meant something more. He was a comfort and companion to Jean, at first a source of hatred giving way to inspiration for Jessica, a local pride for the Hastings town people, and a source of wonder and hope for everyone else looking in. That was the life, fame, and death of Andy the Goose.